They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody mentions what happens when that blood turns cold. When the person who's supposed to believe in you most becomes the voice in your head telling you to quit. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I sat in a boardroom watching my father's face turn white as his new boss introduced me as the owner of Hartford Digital Solutions, the company that had just acquired his failing marketing firm. But let me start from the beginning, because every empire built in spite has its foundation. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, I learned early that disappointment had a specific sound. It was the way my father, David Chen, would sigh when he looked at my report cards. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. Like he'd been expecting this exact moment of mediocrity his entire life. David Chen was a self-made man in the truest sense. He'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but a business degree and an unshakable belief that hard work plus traditional thinking equaled success. By the time I was born, he'd built Chen & Associates Marketing from a one-room office above a dry cleaner into a respectable mid-sized firm with 12 employees and clients throughout Arizona. The office smelled like coffee and desperation. Thick carpets that had seen better decades, fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps, and walls covered with framed certificates and awards that spoke to steady, unremarkable achievement. This was where I spent every summer from age 14, filing papers, answering phones, and learning that in my father's world, there was a right way to do everything, and that way had been established sometime around 1987. I remember the exact moment I realized we saw the world differently. It was July 2019, I was 17, and I'd just finished setting up what I called a social media dashboard for one of our smaller clients, a local restaurant chain called Desert Bloom Cafe. I'd spent 3 days learning basic coding, watching YouTube tutorials until my eyes burned, creating something that could track their Instagram engagement, Facebook reach, and customer sentiment in real time. The owner, Maria Santos, was ecstatic. She'd never seen her social media metrics presented so clearly, never understood how her posts on Tuesday afternoons got 3 times more engagement than her Monday morning content. She was talking about expanding to 2 more locations based on the demographic data I'd pulled from her online presence. I brought the project to my father, expecting praise, maybe even surprise. Instead, he glanced at my laptop screen for exactly 15 seconds before closing it. "Marcus," he said, not looking up from the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. "This is cute, but it's not real marketing. Real marketing is relationships, phone calls, lunch meetings, handshakes. This computer stuff is just a fad that distracts from actual work." I stood there, 17 years old, holding what felt like proof that I could contribute something valuable, and watched him dismiss it like a child's drawing stuck to a refrigerator. "But Dad, look at the results. Maria's revenue is up 23% since we implemented the tracking system. She's making decisions based on actual data instead of guessing." He finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not disappointment, but pity. "Son, you're smart, I'll give you that. But smart isn't enough in this business. You need wisdom, you need experience. You need to understand that clients don't care about your fancy charts and graphs. They care about results, and results come from doing things the way they've always been done, just better." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation. The thing that hurt wasn't the rejection. I'd grown used to that. It was the certainty in his voice, the way he'd spoken about my ideas like they were inherently childish, destined to fail not because they were bad, but because they came from me. The next morning, I started working on something bigger. While my father conducted business the old-fashioned way, 3-hour lunch meetings, handwritten notes, business cards exchanged with the solemnity of peace treaties, I began building what I privately called the future. Every evening after my official duties at Chen & Associates, I'd lock myself in the supply closet with my laptop and a stack of programming books I'd bought with money from my part-time job at Target. I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to prove something, though I wasn't sure what yet. By the end of that summer, I'd created a comprehensive digital marketing platform that could automate social media posting, track competitor pricing, analyze customer feedback across multiple platforms, and generate detailed reports that translated online behavior into actionable business strategies. It was rudimentary, held together with code I'd copied and modified from dozens of sources, but it worked. More importantly, it worked better than anything Chen & Associates was offering their clients. I showed it to my mother first. Linda Chen had always been the diplomatic bridge between my father's traditional approach and my digital inclinations. She worked part-time as the company's bookkeeper, which meant she understood both the creative and practical sides of the business. "This is impressive, honey," she said, scrolling through the demo I'd built using our neighbor's small accounting firm as a test case. "Have you shown your father?" "Not yet. I wanted to make sure it actually worked first." She was quiet for a long moment, studying the screen where user engagement data transformed into neat, colorful charts that even someone with no technical background could understand. "Marcus, can I ask you something? What do you want this to accomplish?" It was a fair question. What did I want? Approval? Recognition? Revenge for all those dismissive sighs and patient explanations about how the real world worked? "I want to prove that I can build something valuable," I said finally. "I want to show him that my ideas aren't just distractions." She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "Your father loves you, you know. He just doesn't know how to understand you." Then maybe it's time he learned. The next day, I requested a formal meeting. Not a casual conversation by the water cooler or a quick chat in his office, but an actual appointment. I printed out 20 pages of documentation, created a PowerPoint presentation, and prepared for what I thought would be my moment of vindication. My father sat behind his desk, hands folded, wearing the expression he reserved for vendors trying to sell him something he didn't need. I started with the problem: how traditional marketing was failing to reach younger demographics, how businesses were losing customers to competitors who understood digital engagement, how the entire industry was shifting toward data-driven decision-making. Then I showed him my solution. For 45 minutes, I walked him through every feature, every benefit, every piece of evidence I'd gathered that this wasn't just a hobby project, but a legitimate business tool. I showed him testimonials from the 3 small businesses I'd been secretly helping, revenue increases that directly correlated with implementing my strategies, client satisfaction scores that exceeded anything Chen & Associates had achieved in the past 2 years. When I finished, the room was silent except for the buzz of those ancient fluorescent lights. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "Marcus," he said finally, "I appreciate the effort you've put into this. I can see you've worked very hard, and the presentation is very professional." My heart started to sink before he even continued. "But son, you're 18 years old. You've never run a business, never had to make payroll, never had to look a client in the eye and promise results you might not be able to deliver. This isn't a video game where you can just restart if something goes wrong. This is people's livelihoods." He stood up, walked around the desk, and put his hand on my shoulder with the kind of gentle firmness usually reserved for delivering bad news. "I know you think I don't understand technology, and maybe you're right. But I understand people, and people don't want to be managed by algorithms. They want to be understood by humans. What you've built here is impressive for a school project, but it's not ready for the real world. But the results are from tiny businesses with nothing to lose. Chen & Associates has real clients with real expectations. We can't risk our reputation on untested theories." He walked back to his desk, sat down, and returned his attention to the quarterly reports. The the conversation clearly over in his mind. "Take the rest of the day off," he said without looking up. "Think about what you want to do when you start college in the fall. Maybe consider business school. Learn the fundamentals before you try to reinvent the wheel." I gathered my papers, my laptop, my 45 minutes of wasted hope, and walked out of that office knowing something had fundamentally changed between us. Not just disappointment this time, but a clean break in understanding. He saw a naive kid playing with toys. I saw someone who'd rather fail using outdated methods than succeed with new ones. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I wasn't going to prove myself to him anymore. I was going to prove myself despite him. College was supposed to be my escape, but Arizona State University felt more like an extension of my father's office. Structured, predictable, designed to produce graduates who would slot neatly into existing systems rather than challenge them. I enrolled as a business major because that's what David Chen's son was expected to do, but I spent most of my time in the computer science building, auditing classes I wasn't registered for and absorbing everything I could about software development, data analytics, and emerging technologies. My dorm room became a laboratory. While my roommate, Jake Morrison, focused on fraternity parties and maintaining a respectable GPA, I turned our shared space into mission control for what I was starting to think of as my real education. 3. Monitors arranged in a semicircle, cables snaking across every surface, and a whiteboard covered with flowcharts that mapped out business processes I wanted to automate. Jake thought I was losing my mind. "Dude, you realize college is supposed to be fun, right?" he'd say, stepping over another Amazon delivery box containing some piece of hardware I'd convinced myself I needed. "When's the last time you went to a party, talked to a girl, left this room for something that wasn't food or class?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. He wasn't wrong. I was becoming obsessed, but it felt purposeful in a way that nothing else in my life had. Every line of code I wrote, every algorithm I optimized, every small breakthrough in functionality felt like armor I was building for a war I knew was coming. The war between who my father thought I should be and who I was determined to become. By sophomore year, I'd developed something remarkable. Not the amateur project I'd shown my father, but a sophisticated platform that could integrate with any business's existing systems and provide real-time intelligence about market trends, customer behavior, and competitive positioning. I called it Vision Core, and it was elegant in its simplicity. A single dashboard that could tell a business owner everything they needed to know to make smart decisions quickly. The breakthrough came when I convinced Professor Sarah Williams, who taught advanced database systems, to let me use the platform for her consulting work with local nonprofits. Sarah was in her 40s, had worked at IBM for 15 years before transitioning to academia, and had no patience for student projects that wasted her time. "Show me something I can actually use," she said when I approached her after class. "Or don't show me anything at all." 3 weeks later, she was using Vision Core to help Phoenix Children's Hospital optimize their fundraising campaigns. The platform identified that their donor engagement peaked on Thursday afternoons, that supporters were 340% more likely to contribute after receiving content about specific patients rather than general appeals, and that their most valuable donors were concentrated in 3 zip codes they'd been completely ignoring. In 4 months, the hospital increased their monthly donations by 67%. "Marcus," Professor Williams said during our final project review, "I've worked with enterprise software that costs companies 6 figures annually, and it doesn't do half of what your platform accomplishes. What are your plans after graduation?" It was a question I'd been avoiding. My father expected me to return to Chen & Associates, probably start in some junior account management role, and learn the business properly from the ground up. The thought made my stomach turn. "I'm not sure yet," I said, which was a lie. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how to do it without completely destroying my relationship with my family. That decision was made for me during Thanksgiving break of my junior year. I came home to find Chen and Associates in crisis. Two major clients had terminated their contracts in the same month, both citing the same reason. Their competitors were using digital marketing strategies that were generating significantly better results. My father was scrambling, working 16 hours a days, trying to retain clients with the same relationship-building approaches that had worked for 20 years, but were suddenly insufficient. My mother pulled me aside the first night I was home. "He won't admit it," she said quietly. "But he's scared. Really scared. The industry is changing faster than he knows how to adapt, and he's too proud to ask for help." "What kind of help?" "The kind you've been trying to give him for 3 years. That weekend, I watched my father struggle through a presentation to Southwestern Automotive Group, a chain of car dealerships that represented 30% of Chen & Associates' annual revenue. The presentation was everything I'd come to expect: professional, thorough, completely out of touch with how their customers actually made purchasing decisions. The dealership's marketing director, Tom Bradley, was polite but direct in his feedback. "David, we appreciate everything you've done for us over the past 8 years, but we need to see measurable improvement in our online presence. Our competitors are dominating social media. Their websites convert visitors to leads at 3 times our rate, and their targeted advertising is pulling customers away from our lots before they even know we exist." My father nodded, made notes, and promised to research digital options, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He had no idea how to deliver what they were asking for. After the meeting, I found him in his office, staring at a computer screen displaying Tom Bradley's competitor analysis, charts and graphs that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Dad," I said from the doorway, "I can help with this." He looked up, and for the first time in years, I didn't see dismissal in his expression. I saw desperation. How? I spent the next hour showing him what Vision Core could do for Southwestern Automotive: real-time inventory tracking integrated with targeted advertising, automated follow-up sequences for website visitors, social media campaigns that adapted based on which vehicles were moving slowly on specific lots, customer journey mapping that identified exactly when and how potential buyers were most likely to make purchasing decisions. For once, he listened without interrupting. "This is what Tom is looking for," I said, pulling up examples of how similar dealerships had increased their sales by an average of 34% using comparable strategies. "This is what every business is looking for now. The question is whether Chen and Associates is going to provide it or watch clients leave for companies that will." My father was quiet for a long time, studying the screen with the intense focus he usually reserved for financial reports. "How long would it take you to implement something like this for Southwestern?" 2 weeks for basic functionality, a month for full integration." "And you can do this while finishing school?" "Dad, I can do this better than anyone you could hire. And I can do it faster because I've already built the foundation." He made a decision that surprised both of us. "Okay, let's try it." For the next month, I commuted between Tempe and Phoenix every day, splitting my time between classes and transforming Southwestern Automotive's entire digital presence. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and proof of concept all at once. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within 2 weeks, their website traffic had doubled. Their social media engagement increased by 400%. Most importantly, their lot visits from online leads went up 58%, and actual sales increased by 23% in the first month alone. Tom Bradley called my father personally to express his amazement and extend their contract for another 3 years. That night, my father took me to dinner at Romano's Macaroni Grill, the same restaurant where he'd celebrated every major business milestone for the past 2 decades. "I owe you an apology," he said over breadsticks and red wine. "I was wrong about your ideas. I was wrong about what clients want. I was wrong about a lot of things. It should have been my moment of vindication, but something felt off. His praise felt conditional, dependent on external validation rather than genuine belief in my capabilities. "Does this mean you want me to join the company officially after graduation?" I asked. "I was hoping you'd consider it. We could expand the digital services division, maybe hire a few more tech people to support what you've built." "What would my role be?" "You'd report to me, obviously. Handle the technical implementation while I manage client relationships and overall strategy." And there it was. Even in success, even after proving myself beyond any reasonable doubt, he still saw me as a junior partner in his vision rather than an equal contributor to something we could build together. I finished dinner, thanked him for the opportunity, and made another decision that would define the next phase of my life. I wasn't going to be in David Chen's digital marketing department. I was going to be his competition. 3 months later, I withdrew from Arizona State University, moved to Austin, Texas, and used my savings plus a $15,000 loan from my mother to launch Hartford Digital Solutions. My father didn't speak to me for 6 months. When he finally called, it was to tell me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I'd thrown away a guaranteed future for a fantasy that would collapse the moment I encountered real business challenges. "You're not ready for this, Marcus," he said. "You're going to fail, and when you do, don't expect me to clean up the mess." I hung up the phone, looked around my cramped Austin apartment that doubled as Hartford Digital's headquarters, and got back to work. Because the thing about being told I'm going to fail is that it clarifies exactly what you need to prove. Austin in 2022 was a city drunk on its own potential. Everywhere you looked, someone was building the next big thing, convinced they were 6 months away from changing the world. My first apartment was a 600-square-foot studio in East Austin that smelled like the taco truck parked permanently outside and cost more than my parents' mortgage payment. But it was mine. The first 6 months were a masterclass in creative problem-solving. When you're bootstrapping a tech company with less than $20,000, every decision becomes a calculation between necessity and survival. I learned to code through the night and sleep during the day to avoid using air conditioning. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for 3 months straight, because every dollar saved was a dollar I could invest in server space and software licenses. My mother sent care packages without telling my father. Boxes of instant coffee, protein bars, and handwritten notes that usually said something like, "Dad asks about you but won't admit it," or "He's struggling more than he lets on." I appreciated the gesture, but I'd made peace with the idea that some bridges can't be rebuilt until you've proven you didn't need them in the first place. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Martinez ran a boutique public relations firm called Catalyst Communications from a converted warehouse in downtown Austin. She specialized in helping tech startups navigate the complicated transition from prototype to product, and she had a reputation for being brutally honest about which companies were worth her time. I met her at a networking event hosted by the Austin Technology Council, one of those awkward gatherings where everyone pretends to be interested in synergy while secretly calculating whether the person they're talking to could be useful later. I was there because the event was free and included dinner, which meant I could skip buying groceries for another day. Rebecca was different from the other attendees. While everyone else was pitching grand visions and revolutionary disruption, she was asking practical questions about revenue models, customer acquisition costs, and competitive differentiation. When she approached me, I expected another generic networking conversation. Instead, she got straight to the point. "I've been watching you for 20 minutes, she said, "and you haven't pitched anyone on anything." In a room full of people desperate to sell their ideas, that's either refreshing honesty or complete social incompetence. Which is it? Maybe a little of both, I admitted. I'm not great at selling things I'm not sure people want to buy. What do you build? I gave her the 30-second version of Hartford Digital Solutions. business intelligence platforms that help companies make data-driven decisions without requiring a team of analysts to interpret the results. Clean, simple, actionable. She listened without interrupting, asked 3 specific technical questions that demonstrated she actually understood what I was describing, then said something that changed everything. I have a client who needs exactly what you're describing. Small problem, though. They need it implemented in 6 weeks, and they're already burned by 2 developers who overpromise and underdelivered. If I refer you and you screw this up, it reflects on my reputation. So before I risk that, I need to see proof that you can actually deliver what you're claiming. The client was Meridian Health Services, a network of urgent care clinics throughout Texas that was drowning in operational inefficiency. They had 7 locations, inconsistent patient flow, inventory management that relied on spreadsheets and phone calls, and no systematic way to identify which services were profitable versus which ones were bleeding money. Their CEO, Dr. Amanda Foster, had tried working with 2 different consulting firms in the past year. Both had charged substantial fees to deliver reports that told her things she already knew without providing tools to fix the problems they'd identified. "I don't need another analysis," she told me during our first meeting. "I need solutions that work on Monday morning." I spent a week studying their operations, sitting in waiting rooms, talking to front desk staff, observing how information moved through their system. The problems were obvious once you knew where to look. Patient scheduling was based on historical averages rather than real-time demand patterns. Supply ordering happened on fixed schedules regardless of actual usage. Most critically, they had no way to track which patients were likely to return for follow-up care versus which ones were one-time visits. The platform I built for Meridian integrated all of these data streams into a single dashboard that updated in real time. Suddenly, Dr. Foster could see which locations were overstaffed on Tuesday mornings, which supplies were being over-ordered at specific clinics, and which types of patients generated the highest lifetime value. More importantly, the system could predict these patterns and make recommendations automatically. Within a month, Meridian had reduced their average patient wait time by 34%, cut supply costs by 18%, and increased patient satisfaction scores across all locations. Dr. Foster was so impressed that she introduced me to 3 other healthcare networks, all of whom became clients within 60 days. Rebecca Martinez had been watching the results closely. "You've got something here," she said over coffee at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road. "The question is what you want to do with it. You can keep taking on individual clients and building custom solutions, or you can scale this into something bigger." What does bigger look like? Software as a service. Instead of building custom platforms for each client, you create one robust system that can be configured for different industries. Subscription revenue, predictable growth, venture capital interest if you want to go that route. The idea was both terrifying and obvious. Everything I'd built so far had been reactive, solving specific problems for specific clients. But Rebecca was talking about something proactive, building a product that could serve thousands of companies I'd never met. It would require a completely different approach to development, marketing, and business strategy. It would also require more capital than I had access to. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "I've been talking to other entrepreneurs in Austin, and your name keeps coming up. Not from networking events or conference presentations, but from actual results. Word of mouth in this town spreads fast when someone consistently delivers what they promise." She was right. Over the past 8 months, Hartford Digital Solutions had grown from my apartment-based experiment to a legitimate business with 12 active clients and a waiting list of potential projects. I'd hired 2 part-time developers, both recent graduates from UT Austin who were brilliant but inexperienced enough to work for equity, plus modest salaries. Alex Thompson specialized in user interface design and had an intuitive understanding of how non-technical people interact with complex software. Maria Gonzalez was a data science prodigy who could make algorithms dance in ways that seemed almost magical. Together, we'd created something that felt bigger than the sum of its parts. But scaling meant taking risks I wasn't sure I was ready for. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked Rebecca. "What if we build this platform and nobody wants it? What if we're wrong about the market demand?" She smiled in a way that suggested she'd heard this question from dozens of other entrepreneurs. "Then you'll fail, learn something valuable, and build something better next time. But if you don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to find out." That night, I called my mother, not to ask for advice, but to share what was happening in my life with the one person who'd consistently believed in my potential even when I wasn't sure I believed in it myself. "Honey, you sound different," she said after I'd explained the opportunity Rebecca had outlined. "More confident. More like yourself." "What do you mean?" "For years, you've been trying to prove something to your father. Now it sounds like you're building something for yourself. That's a big difference." She was right, though I hadn't recognized the shift until she pointed it out. Somewhere in the process of solving real problems for real clients, I'd stopped thinking about David Chen's approval and started focusing on creating value that stood on its own merit. "Have you thought about what this might mean for your relationship with Dad?" she asked. The honest answer was that I tried not to think about it. My father and I had spoken exactly 3 times since I'd moved to Austin, each conversation brief and strained. He'd made it clear that he considered my decision a personal betrayal, and I'd made it clear that I wasn't interested in defending choices that were producing measurable success. "I don't know, Mom. Part of me hopes he'll eventually see that I made the right decision. Part of me thinks it doesn't matter anymore." "It matters," she said quietly. "Maybe not in the way you think, but it matters." 2 weeks later, I made the decision to pivot Hartford Digital Solutions from a consulting firm to a software company. We started building what would become Vision Core 2.0, a comprehensive business intelligence platform designed to serve small and medium-sized companies across multiple industries. It was the biggest professional risk I'd ever taken, and it felt like jumping off a cliff while building wings on the way down. What I didn't know was that 300 miles away in Phoenix, Chen & Associates was about to face a crisis that would test everything my father had built over the previous 25 years. And that crisis was going to force both of us to confront questions we'd been avoiding about success, failure, and what it means to build something that lasts. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2024. I was debugging a server integration issue that had been haunting me for 3 days, surviving on energy drinks and the kind of focused determination that only comes when you're building something that matters. The number on my phone showed Linda Chen, and my stomach dropped immediately because my mother had never called me that late unless something was genuinely wrong. "Marcus, honey, I'm sorry to wake you, but I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." Her voice carried the careful steadiness of someone delivering news they'd rehearsed multiple times. "What happened?" "Your father's company is in trouble. Real trouble. We lost Southwestern Automotive yesterday, and Wilson Manufacturing terminated their contract this morning. That's 43% of our annual revenue gone in 48 hours. I sat back in my chair, processing information that felt both shocking and inevitable. For 2 years, I'd been building Hartford Digital Solutions while deliberately avoiding news about Chen & Associates. It was easier to focus on my own growth than to think about what was happening in the industry I'd left behind. How bad is it? Bad enough that he's talking about selling the building, maybe closing entirely. The building. The same office where I'd spent summers learning that I'd never be smart enough, creative enough, or practical enough to contribute something meaningful to the family business. The thought of it being sold should have felt like vindication, but instead, it felt like watching something important dissolve. "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the kind of background noise that suggested she was pacing around the kitchen, probably making tea she wouldn't drink. Both clients said the same thing when they left. They said Chen and Associates couldn't provide the digital marketing services they needed to compete in their markets. They said we were 20 years behind the industry standard. The irony was so sharp it almost hurt. 3 years ago, I'd tried to convince my father that this exact scenario was inevitable. 3 years ago, he'd told me that real business was about relationships and handshakes, that technology was a distraction from authentic connection. Now the market had rendered its verdict, and it wasn't interested in authenticity over results. What's Dad saying about all this? He's not saying much of anything. He comes home, sits in his chair, stares at financial reports, and goes to bed. Yesterday, I found him in the garage at 11 p.m., organizing tools that were already organized. He's scared, Marcus. More scared than I've ever seen him. I understood that fear. I'd lived with it for the past 2 years. The constant anxiety that comes with building something from nothing, while knowing that failure means losing everything you've invested. The difference was that I'd chosen my risk consciously, while my father was discovering that avoiding risk had become the biggest risk of all. Have you talked to him about updating their services, maybe partnering with a digital marketing firm? I suggested it. He said he'd rather close the business than admit he doesn't know how to run it anymore. Pride. The same pride that had prevented him from listening to my ideas when I was 18 was now preventing him from saving a company he'd spent 25 years building. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you think he'd accept help if it came from me? The pause that followed was long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. I don't know, honey. I think part of him wants to, but he's ashamed. He's ashamed that you were right about the direction the industry was heading, and he's ashamed that he can't fix this himself. After we hung up, I sat in my Austin apartment staring at my laptop screen, thinking about family and business and the complicated ways that success can feel like failure when it comes at the cost of relationships that matter. Hartford Digital. Solutions had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I started. We now had 37 active clients, annual recurring revenue approaching $2 million, and a team of 12 full-time employees working out of a proper office space in downtown Austin. Vision Core 2.0 had officially launched 6 months earlier, and we were adding new subscribers every week. More importantly, we were solving real problems for real businesses. Companies were making better decisions, increasing their revenue, and gaining competitive advantages because of software my team had built from scratch. But success in business doesn't automatically translate to success in life, and I was starting to understand that some victories feel hollow when the people you care about aren't there to witness them. The next morning, I called Rebecca Martinez. I need advice about something personal, I said, but it has business implications. Those are usually the most interesting problems. What's going on? I explained the situation with Chen and Associates, my father's crisis, and the complicated history that made any potential intervention delicate. So, you're asking whether you should try to save your father's business, she said when I finished. I'm asking whether it's possible to do that without destroying what I've built here. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her tapping a pen against her desk. A habit I'd learned meant she was thinking through multiple scenarios simultaneously. Marcus, can I ask you something? What would success look like in this situation? Best case scenario? What outcome would make you feel like you'd handled this correctly? It wasn't a question I'd expected, but the answer came immediately. I want to prove that the work I'm doing matters, not just to clients I've never met, but to the person whose opinion shaped how I see myself for the first 18 years of my life. And if he still doesn't acknowledge that what you've built is valuable, then at least I'll know I tried. She laughed, but not in a way that suggested she thought the situation was funny. You know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing about someone who's successful enough to take a risk that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with closure. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I researched Chen and Associates. What I found was worse than my mother had described. Their website looked like it had been built in 2003 and abandoned. Their social media presence was virtually non-existent. Their client testimonials were outdated, and their service offerings read like a catalog of marketing approaches that had been superseded by more effective methods. But I also found something interesting. Despite losing their two biggest clients, Chen and Associates still had a roster of smaller businesses that had been working with them for years. Restaurants, retail stores, professional services firms, the kind of local companies that valued relationships and consistency over cutting-edge strategy. These were exactly the types of businesses that could benefit most from the kind of integrated digital platform Hartford Digital had perfected. Spent the next 3 days building something I called Project Phoenix, a comprehensive business plan for transforming Chen and Associates from a traditional marketing firm into a hybrid agency that combined relationship-based account management with sophisticated digital tools. The plan was detailed, realistic, and designed to leverage my father's existing client relationships while adding the technical capabilities that would make Chen and Associates competitive in the current market. It would require significant investment in training, technology, and probably some new hires, but it was absolutely feasible. More importantly, it was a plan that would allow David Chen to remain the leader of his company while adapting to a new industry that had evolved beyond his current expertise. The question was whether he'd be willing to listen to it. I called my mother again. "I want to come home for a visit," I said. "Not to gloat, not to say I told you so, but to see if there's a way to help. Marcus, you need to understand something. Your father is proud, but he's not stupid. He knows you've been successful in Austin. He sees your LinkedIn posts. He's heard about Hartford Digital from people in the industry. He's just not sure how to bridge the gap between where you are now and where you left things 3 years ago. What if I made it easy for him? What if I came with a proposal that didn't require him to admit he was wrong? Just that the industry had changed and we could adapt together? You'd really do that? After everything that's happened? Mom, I've spent 3 years proving I could build something successful. Maybe it's time to prove I can build something that matters. 2 weeks later, I boarded a flight from Austin to Phoenix, carrying a briefcase that contained what might have been the most important presentation of my life. Not because of the money involved, or the business opportunity, or even the satisfaction of proving my methods worked, but because some relationships are worth more than being right, and some bridges are worth rebuilding, even when you're not sure they'll hold the weight of everything that's passed between the people trying to cross them. Phoenix in April felt like returning to a photograph that had been left in the sun too. Long, familiar but faded, details blurred by time and distance. The drive from Sky Harbor Airport to my parents' house took me through neighborhoods I'd known by heart at 18, but now felt like a tourist exploring. Strip malls had changed ownership. New developments had sprouted where desert used to stretch endlessly, and the whole city seemed to be wearing a coat of dust that hadn't been there when I left. My mother was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up in the rental car, and the relief on her face was complicated by something I couldn't immediately identify. Worry, maybe. Or the kind of cautious hope that comes from wanting something so badly you're afraid to believe it might actually happen. "You look good," she said, wrapping me in a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Successful." "I look tired," I corrected, though I appreciated the sentiment. 3 years of building a company from scratch will do that to you. "Your father's in his office," she said, and I noticed she didn't call it the study anymore. "He's been there since 6 this morning, working on something. I'm not sure what, but he's been more agitated than usual." The house felt smaller than I remembered, though nothing had actually changed. Same furniture, same family photos documenting graduations and vacations from a time when our biggest concern was whether I'd get into a decent college. The only difference was a stack of business magazines on the coffee table, all of them featuring articles about digital transformation and the future of marketing. My father had been doing research. I found him hunched over a laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and handwritten notes that looked like battle plans. He was wearing reading glasses I'd never seen before, and his hair had more gray than I'd expected. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his expression cycled through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been relief. "Marcus!" He stood up, closed the laptop, and extended his hand like we were meeting for the first time. "Thank you for coming." The formality was jarring, but I understood it. We were both navigating territory we'd never mapped before, trying to figure out how to be father and son when we'd spent 3 years being strangers. "Mom told me what's been happening," I said, shaking his hand and trying to read his expression. "I'm sorry about Southwestern and Wilson." "Yes, well." He gestured to the papers scattered across the table. "The market has made its position clear. Traditional approaches aren't sufficient anymore." It was as close to an admission of error as I was likely to get, and I appreciated that he was giving me even that much. "What are you working on?" I asked, nodding toward the laptop. "Research, trying to understand what I missed, what I should have seen coming." He sat back down, suddenly looking older than his 53 years. "Do you know what's humbling about failing at something you thought you understood? It's not the financial loss, though that's certainly concerning. It's realizing that you've been so focused on being right that you stopped paying attention to whether you were being effective." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of that statement. "I brought something that might help," I said finally. "Not advice, not criticism. A proposal." He looked at me with the kind of cautious interest reserved for opportunities that seem too good to be true. "What kind of proposal?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out the Project Phoenix documentation I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. Clean, professional, comprehensive. Everything I'd learned about presenting complex ideas to people who had reasons to be skeptical. "A plan to save Chen & Associates," I said. "But not by changing everything you've built. By adding capabilities that complement what you're already good at." For the next hour, I walked him through the entire strategy. How to integrate digital tools without abandoning relationship-based account management. How to train existing staff on new technologies without making them feel obsolete. How to position the company as a hybrid agency that could serve both traditional clients and businesses that needed sophisticated online presence. I showed him case studies from Hartford Digital's client base, revenue projections based on Chen & Associates' existing client relationships, and a detailed timeline for implementation that would minimize disruption while maximizing competitive advantage. Most importantly, I showed him how this approach would allow him to remain the leader of his company while leveraging expertise he didn't have to develop personally. "This is impressive work," he said when I finished. "Very thorough. But I have to ask, what's in this for you? Your company is successful. You don't need to get involved in my problems." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself throughout the flight from Austin. "I've spent 3 years proving I could build something without you," I said. "Maybe it's time to prove I can build something with you." He studied the proposal for several minutes, flipping through pages and making notes in the margins. I watched him process the information, seeing his business mind engage with possibilities he'd been too proud or too scared to consider. "This would require significant investment," he said finally. "New software, training, possibly additional staff. We don't have the capital for a transformation this comprehensive." "Actually, we do," I said. "Hartford Digital Solutions would like to make a strategic investment in Chen & Associates. Not a buyout, not a takeover. A partnership." He looked up sharply. "What kind of partnership?" "Hartford Digital provides the technology, training, and capital for the digital transformation. Chen & Associates provides the client relationships, industry knowledge, and local market expertise. We split the revenue from new services, and you maintain full control of your existing business operations. And if it doesn't work, then we learn something valuable and try a different approach. It was the same answer Rebecca Martinez had given me 2 years earlier when I'd been afraid to pivot Hartford Digital from consulting to software development. The same answer I'd given myself every time I'd faced a decision that required more courage than certainty. My father closed the proposal and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something, Marcus? When you started your company, were you trying to prove me wrong, or were you trying to prove yourself right?" "Both," I admitted. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about you and started being about the work itself." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." He stood up, walked to the window that overlooked the backyard where I'd spent countless hours as a kid, throwing a baseball against the garage door and dreaming about futures I couldn't yet imagine. "I've made mistakes," he said without turning around. "Not just business mistakes, but father mistakes. I was so focused on protecting you from failure that I never gave you the chance to succeed." "Dad, let me finish." He turned back to face me. 3 years ago, when you left to start your own company, I was angry. Not because you were leaving, but because you were right about things I didn't want to admit. I spent 25 years building a business based on the assumption that the fundamentals of marketing would never change. You understood that the fundamentals don't change, but the tools do. He picked up the proposal again, holding it like it contained the blueprint for rebuilding something that had been damaged. "I'd like to accept your partnership offer," he said. "Not because I need the money, though I do, and not because I need the technology, though I do, but because I'd like to work with my son on something that matters to both of us." It should have been the moment I'd been waiting for. Vindication, acknowledgement, the satisfaction of being proven right. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new rather than the end of something old. "There's one condition," I said. "What's that?" "We do this as equals, not as father and son, not as mentor and student, as business partners who respect each other's expertise and contribute what they do best." He smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping I'd say exactly that. "I think I can manage that." That evening, my parents and I went to dinner at the same Romano's Macaroni Grill, where my father had taken me 3 years earlier to celebrate the Southwestern automotive success. But this time, the conversation wasn't about validation or apology. It was about the future we were going to build together, and for the first time in years, that future felt like something worth building. 2 weeks later, I moved Hartford Digital Solutions headquarters from Austin to Phoenix, not because I was giving up on what I'd built, but because I'd found a way to make it bigger than I'd imagined possible. The real work was just beginning. The transformation of Chen & Associates happened, faster than anyone expected, including me. Within 8 weeks of our partnership announcement, we'd integrated Hartford Digital's platform with my father's existing client relationships, and were delivering results that surprised even our most optimistic projections. The key was something neither of us had anticipated: the combination of David's decades-long client relationships with cutting-edge digital tools created a competitive advantage that purely digital agencies couldn't match. Clients trusted him personally, which meant they were willing to try new approaches they might have rejected from a stranger. And because the technology actually worked, their trust was rewarded with measurable improvements in their business performance. By September 2024, we'd not only retained all of Chen & Associates' remaining clients, but had added 14 new ones, expanded into 2 additional markets, and established ourselves as the premier hybrid marketing agency in the Southwest. But success, I was learning, creates its own set of complications. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing quarterly performance reports in the office that had once felt like enemy territory, but now felt like home. My assistant, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on my door with an expression that suggested the conversation she was about to relay was either very good news or very bad news. There's someone online too who says he represents Pinnacle Marketing Group, she said. He's asking to speak with the owner of Hartford Digital Solutions about a potential acquisition opportunity. He said, and I quote, "the kind that makes people very wealthy very quickly." I took the call, expecting a standard corporate development pitch about synergies and growth opportunities. Instead, I found myself talking to James Morrison, Pinnacle's Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, who had apparently been tracking Hartford Digital's performance for the past 18 months. "Mr. Chen," he said, "I'll be direct because I respect your time and mine. Pinnacle Marketing Group would like to acquire Hartford Digital Solutions. We're prepared to offer $47 million for complete ownership, plus performance. Bonuses that could add another $15 million over the next 3 years." I sat down heavily in my chair, staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline while processing numbers that exceeded anything I'd imagined when I'd started the company in my Austin apartment. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully. "But Hartford Digital isn't for sale." "Everything is for sale at the right price, Mr. Chen. The question is whether our first offer reflects your expectations or whether we need to have a more detailed conversation about valuation. It's not about the money." "It's always about the money, but sometimes it's also about other things. Growth opportunities, market reach, resources for expansion. Pinnacle can offer all of that." He was right, of course. $47 million would make me financially independent for life. It would also mean giving up control of something I'd built from nothing, probably relocating to corporate headquarters in Chicago, and almost certainly ending the partnership with my father that had become the most satisfying professional relationship of my life. "I appreciate the interest," I said, "but I'm not ready to consider selling." "Mr. Chen, I understand this feels sudden, but opportunities like this don't wait for convenient timing. The digital marketing space is consolidating rapidly. Companies that don't scale quickly get absorbed by companies that do. We're offering you the chance to be part of the winning side. Can I ask how you learned about Hartford Digital?" "Several ways. Your revenue growth has been remarkable. Your client retention rates are exceptional, and your technology platform is more sophisticated than most companies 10 times your size. But what really caught our attention was your recent partnership with Chen and Associates." Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. "What about the partnership?" "It's an innovative model. Most agencies either focus on relationships or technology, but you figured out how to combine both effectively. That's exactly the kind of hybrid approach we think will dominate the market over the next 5 years." The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, during which James Morrison outlined Pinnacle's expansion strategy, their acquisition timeline, and their expectations for Hartford Digital's role in their national network. It was impressive, comprehensive, and completely contrary to everything I wanted for my company. After I hung up, I sat alone in my office trying to process what had just happened. 18 months ago, I'd been eating ramen noodles and debugging code until 3 in the morning. Now, one of the largest marketing companies in the country was offering me enough money to never work again, but the offer also forced me to confront a question I'd been avoiding. What did I actually want Hartford Digital to become? I found my father in the conference room, leading a training session for our expanded account management team. He was explaining how to interpret the analytics reports that had once seemed like foreign language to him, but now formed the foundation of every client recommendation he made. "The numbers tell you what happened," he was saying, "but they don't tell you why it happened. That's where relationship knowledge becomes invaluable. When you understand your client's business challenges, their competitive environment, and their growth objectives, you can help them interpret data in ways that lead to better decisions." It was exactly the kind of integrated thinking that made our partnership work, combining technological capability with human insight to create solutions. Neither of us could have developed independently. After the training session ended, I asked him to stay behind. "We need to talk about something," I said, closing the conference room door. "Pinnacle Marketing Group wants to acquire Hartford Digital." his expression shifted immediately from relaxed satisfaction to sharp attention. What kind of acquisition? I outlined the offer, the timeline, and the implications for both Hartford Digital and our partnership. David listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, approaching the conversation with the same analytical focus he brought to every major business decision. $47 million is life-changing money, he said when I finished. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what we'd be giving up. Which is? Control over our client relationships, autonomy in how we deliver services, the ability to make decisions based on what's best for our clients rather than what's best for Pinnacle's quarterly earnings. He was quiet for a moment, studying his notes. Marcus, can I share something with you? When I started Chen & Associates 25 years ago, I had opportunities to sell or partner with larger firms. I always chose independence because I believed that staying small and focused was better than becoming a department in someone else's company. And now? Now I think I was right for the wrong reasons. I chose independence because I was afraid of change. You're choosing independence because you understand what you'd be changing into. It was a distinction I hadn't considered, but it clarified something important about the decision I was facing. What would you do? I asked. I'd ask myself whether the life I could buy with $47 million would be more satisfying than the business I could build by staying independent. That night, I called Rebecca Martinez in Austin. Congratulations, she said when I explained the situation. Pinnacle doesn't make offers like that unless they're convinced they're buying something extraordinary. That's not exactly the advice I was hoping for. What advice were you hoping for? I was hoping you'd tell me I'd be crazy to turn down this much money. Would that make the decision easier? It would make it simpler, she laughed. Marcus, do you remember what you told me 2 years ago when you were deciding whether to pivot Hartford Digital from consulting to software development? That I wanted to build something that mattered, not just something that was profitable. Has that changed? The honest answer was no. If anything, the partnership with my father had reinforced my belief that the most satisfying business success comes from creating value for people you care about, solving problems that matter, and building something that reflects your values rather than just your ambitions. I'm going to turn them down, I said. Good. But you should probably have a conversation with your team first. $47 million affects more than just your personal finances. She was right. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting for both Hartford Digital and Chen & Associates staff, 26 people whose careers and livelihoods were connected to decisions I made about the company's future. I explained the acquisition offer, the timeline, and the choice we were facing as an organization. I want to hear from everyone, I said. This affects all of us, and I think we should make this decision together. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from financial security to creative autonomy to the kind of work environment we wanted to be part of. In the end, the vote was unanimous. We wanted to remain independent. But what happened next was something none of us had anticipated. 3 days after I officially declined Pinnacle's offer, James Morrison called with a different proposition entirely. One that would test everything I'd learned about success, family, and the complicated relationship between personal achievement and professional recognition. James Morrison's second call came exactly 1 week after I'd declined Pinnacle's acquisition offer. This time, his tone was different. Less corporate salesman, more strategic chess player making his final move. Mr. Chen, I respect your decision to maintain independence, he said. But I have a different proposition that might interest you. Instead of acquiring Hartford Digital, we'd like to hire you as a strategic consultant for some of our recent acquisitions that are struggling with digital transformation. What kind of consulting? The kind where you help traditional marketing firms transition to hybrid models without losing their core client relationships. Based on what you've accomplished with Chen & Associates, you seem to understand this process better than anyone in the industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pinnacle wanted to pay me to help their acquired companies solve the exact same problem I'd solved for my father's business. I'm listening. Our first assignment would be unusual, Morrison continued. We recently acquired a mid-sized marketing firm in Phoenix that's been struggling with client retention and digital competitiveness. The owner is resistant to change. We think he might respond better to guidance from someone who's successfully navigated this transition locally. Something about the way he said Phoenix made my attention sharpen. What's the name of the firm? Chen and Associates. The words hit me like cold water. I sat up straighter, my mind racing through implications I couldn't quite process. I'm sorry, what did you say? Chen and Associates. We acquired it 3 months ago when they were facing bankruptcy. The former owner, David Chen, is still running day-to-day operations under our management, but he's been resistant to implementing the digital strategies we know are necessary for the company's survival. The room around me seemed to tilt. Everything I thought I understood about the past 6 months suddenly rearranged itself into a completely different picture. Mr. Morrison, I said carefully, I think there's been some confusion. I'm Marcus Chen. David Chen is my father, and Chen and Associates is our family business. We're not owned by Pinnacle. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long, enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Mr. Chen, Morrison said finally, I think we need to have a face-to-face conversation. Are you available for a meeting this afternoon? 2 hours later, I was sitting in the lobby of the Pinnacle Marketing Group regional office in Scottsdale, trying to reconcile what I thought I knew about my family's business with what James Morrison was about to tell me. He appeared exactly on time, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who was about to deliver news that would fundamentally alter someone's understanding of reality. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I need to show you some documents that might be surprising. He opened the folder and handed me an acquisition agreement dated 4 months earlier. David Chen's signature was on the final page, along with terms that transferred complete ownership of Chen & Associates to Pinnacle Marketing Group for $2.3 million plus assumption of existing debts. This is impossible, I said, staring at my father's handwriting. We've been working together for 6 months. We're partners. According to our records, Hartford Digital Solutions has been operating as a subcontractor for Chen & Associates, providing digital services under our management oversight. Your father never informed you that we owned the company you thought you were partnering with. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced. Not just the business deception, but the personal one. Every conversation about working together, as equals, every moment of pride in our collaboration, every assumption about rebuilding our relationship, all of it had been built on a lie. Why would he do this? Mr. Chen, I think that's a question you need to ask your father directly. But I can tell you that when we acquired Chen & Associates, David Chen specifically requested that Hartford Digital Solutions be contracted for digital services without disclosure of the ownership change. He said it was important that you believe you were entering into a partnership rather than a subcontracting arrangement. I stood up, my mind reeling with implications and questions, and a growing sense of betrayal that made it difficult to think clearly. What happens now? Now, we'd like to offer you a position as Digital Strategy Director for our Southwest operations, reporting directly to me. The compensation package would be substantial, and you'd have oversight of digital transformation for all our regional acquisitions. Including Chen & Associates? Including Chen & Associates, which means you'd effectively be your father's boss. The irony was so complete it felt like fiction. 3 years ago, David Chen had dismissed my ideas as naive and impractical. Now, through a series of business decisions he'd made without my knowledge, I was being offered a position where I would have direct authority over the company he'd built and the approach he'd used to run it. I need to think about this, I said. Of course. But Mr. Chen, I should mention that this offer comes with a deadline. Pinnacle is restructuring our Southwest operations next month, and we need to know whether you're interested in leading that process, or whether we should look elsewhere. That evening, I sat in my car outside my parents' house, trying to decide how to confront my father about a deception that had undermined everything I thought we'd rebuilt together. When I finally walked inside, I found him in the kitchen, preparing for what he'd told me was a client dinner, but which I now realized was probably a Pinnacle management meeting. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in my tone made him look up immediately, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He knew what I'd discovered. "Marcus, I can explain. You sold the company 4 months ago." "Yes. While I was moving my entire operation from Austin to Phoenix to be your partner." "Yes. And you never told me that I was actually working as a subcontractor for the company that bought your business." He sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From knowing that I'd failed. That everything I'd built over 25 years wasn't worth enough to save without outside intervention. That the son who'd left to start his own company was more successful at 24 than his father had ever been." The pain in his voice was genuine, but it didn't diminish the betrayal I felt. "So you lied to me. I preserved the possibility that we could work together without your success being overshadowed by my failure." I sat down across from him, trying to process emotions that ranged from anger to disappointment to something that might have been sympathy. "Dad, do you know what Pinnacle just offered me?" "What?" "A job as digital strategy director. Your boss's boss, authority over every decision Chen and Associates makes going forward." His face went white. "Marcus, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You were so afraid of admitting you needed help that you created a situation where I'd have to choose between working for the company that owns your business or watching them replace you with someone who will implement the changes you've been resisting." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us contemplating the complexity of pride, success, and the ways that family relationships can become entangled with professional decisions. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. I looked at my father, the man who'd shaped my understanding of work, success, and the importance of building something that lasts. The man who'd also taught me, unintentionally, that sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who push you to prove them wrong. "I'm going to accept Pinnacle's offer," I said. His shoulders sagged with what looked like defeat. "But not because I want authority over you," I continued. "Because I want to make sure that when they restructure their Southwest operations, they do it in a way that preserves what you've built while adding what's necessary to compete in the current market." He looked up, confusion replacing resignation. "Marcus, I don't understand." "Dad, you taught me that the most important thing about business is taking care of the people who depend on you. That includes your employees, your clients, and your family. Pinnacle owns Chen and Associates now, but they don't understand what made it valuable in the first place." "I do. So you'll take the job to protect the company?" "I'll take the job to prove that the best way to honor someone's legacy isn't to preserve it unchanged, but to help it evolve into something even better." 3 weeks later, I walked into the Pinnacle conference room for my first management meeting as digital strategy director. The agenda included a presentation on Southwest operations restructuring, with Chen and Associates featured as a case study in successful hybrid agency transformation. My father was there, along with the management teams from 4 other Pinnacle acquisitions. When James Morrison introduced me as the new director who would be overseeing digital strategy for all Southwest operations, I watched my father's expression cycle through surprise, pride, and something that looked like redemption. "Our first case study," I said, advancing to the presentation slide that showed Chen and Associates' revenue growth over the past 6 months, "demonstrates that the most effective digital transformation happens when you combine technological capability with existing relationship strengths rather than replacing one with the other." I looked directly at my father. Sometimes the best way to build something new is to understand what made the original version valuable and then enhance it rather than starting over. After the meeting, my father approached me in the hallway. "I'm Proud of you, he said. Not because of the promotion or the title, but because you figured out how to be successful without losing sight of what matters. I learned that from you, I said. It just took me a few years to understand the lesson. The transformation that followed exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Within 3 months of taking the digital strategy director position, I'd implemented Hartford Digital's platform across all 5 of Pinnacle's Southwest acquisitions. But Chen & Associates became the flagship example of what was possible when you respected a company's existing culture while upgrading its capabilities. The changes were dramatic but organic. David's longtime assistant, Margaret Torres, who'd been with the company for 12 years, became our lead client relationship coordinator after completing a comprehensive digital literacy program I'd designed specifically for experienced staff. She could now pull real-time analytics during client calls, making recommendations that combined her intuitive understanding of each client's personality with data-driven insights about their market performance. I never thought I'd be comfortable with all this technology, she told me during a quarterly review meeting. But Marcus showed us that we weren't learning new jobs. We were just getting better tools for the jobs we already knew how to do. The client's results spoke for themselves. Desert Bloom Cafe, the restaurant chain where I'd first tested social media analytics 5 years earlier, had expanded to 8 locations and credited our integrated approach with helping them identify the most profitable expansion markets. Their owner, Maria Santos, now served on our client advisory board, helping us understand how small businesses could maximize the value of sophisticated marketing tools. But the most satisfying transformation was watching my father evolve from someone who'd been intimidated by digital analytics into someone who could teach other traditional marketers how to integrate technology without losing their personal touch. Remember the day he called me into his office? Now technically my subordinate's office, though we'd both learned to navigate that complexity gracefully, to show me a presentation he'd developed for the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. I've been asked to speak about the future of small business marketing, he said, pulling up slides that seamlessly blended relationship-building strategies with data visualization techniques. 6 months ago, I would have declined because I didn't think I had anything relevant to say. Now I realize I have something unique to offer. Which is? The perspective of someone who's learned that embracing change doesn't mean abandoning your core values. It means finding better ways to express them. The presentation was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Phoenix Convention Center, and David had asked me to attend as his guest. I expected a standard Chamber of Commerce talk, polite, informative, forgettable. Instead, I watched my father deliver one of the most compelling presentations I'd ever seen about the intersection of tradition and innovation. 25 years ago, he told an audience of 200 local business owners, I built Chen & Associates on the belief that marketing was fundamentally about human relationships. Phone calls, lunch meetings, understanding your clients' challenges well enough to offer solutions they didn't know they needed. He advanced to a slide showing client retention statistics that demonstrated how relationship-focused approaches still outperformed purely transactional marketing strategies. I still believe that's true. But what I've learned recently is that technology doesn't replace human relationships. It amplifies them. When you understand your clients as people and also understand their business data, you can serve them in ways that neither pure relationship marketing nor pure digital marketing can achieve alone. The audience was completely engaged, asking questions that went far beyond marketing tactics to explore fundamental questions about how businesses adapt to changing environments while maintaining their essential character. After the presentation, I watched David work the room with the same natural relationship-building skills he'd always possessed. But now he was also exchanging contact information through QR codes and discussing data analytics with the fluency of someone who'd mastered a second language. You should be proud of him, said a voice behind me. I turned to find Dr. Amanda Foster, the CEO of Meridian Health Services, who'd been one of Hartford Digital's earliest Austin clients, and had remained connected to our work even after my move to Phoenix. Dr. Foster, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm considering expanding Meridian into the Phoenix market, she said. When I heard David Chen was speaking about hybrid marketing approaches, I had to attend. The transformation you've helped him achieve is remarkable. He did most of the work himself. I just provided some tools. That's not true. And you know it. What you provided was belief. You believed he could learn new approaches without sacrificing what made him effective in the first place. That's a rare gift. Her observations stayed with me during the drive home, as I reflected on how different this conversation was from the one we'd had 3 years earlier when I'd first shown David my social media dashboard for Desert Bloom Cafe. The real difference wasn't just his willingness to embrace technology. It was his understanding that growth doesn't require abandoning your identity. It requires expanding your definition of what your identity can include. That insight became the foundation for a book I started writing that fall. Hybrid Leadership: How Traditional Business Wisdom and Digital Innovation Create Sustainable Competitive Advantage. The publisher, Harvard Business Review Press, had approached me after seeing the results we'd achieved across Pinnacle's Southwest portfolio. But more than a business book, it became a reflection on family dynamics, generational change, and the ways that conflict can evolve into collaboration when both parties are willing to question their assumptions. David agreed to co-author 2 chapters, sharing his perspective on what it felt like to learn new skills at age 54 and how traditional business owners could navigate digital transformation without losing their core competencies. The hardest part, he wrote in our chapter on overcoming resistance to change, wasn't learning new technology. It was admitting that my son understood things about business that I didn't. But once I made that admission, I discovered that he'd learned most of what he knew by watching me. He'd just applied those lessons to problems I hadn't recognized yet. The book was published 18 months later and became required reading in several MBA programs. More importantly, it led to speaking engagements where David and I appeared together, demonstrating how family businesses could bridge generational differences to create competitive advantages that purely professional partnerships couldn't achieve. One of those presentations was at the National Association of Family Businesses annual conference in Chicago. The audience included hundreds of business owners struggling with similar questions about succession, modernization, and maintaining family harmony while pursuing professional success. During the Q&A session, a woman in her 60s raised her hand and asked a question that cut to the heart of everything we'd experienced. "Mr. Chen," she said, addressing David, "how do you handle the ego challenge of having your child become your professional superior? Doesn't that create resentment or family tension?" David was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. "It would have," he said finally, "if I'd continued thinking of success as a zero-sum game where his achievements somehow diminished my own. But I've learned that the most satisfying kind of success is when you help someone you care about become better than you ever were." He looked at me before continuing. "Marcus isn't my boss because he defeated me or proved me wrong. He's my boss because he took the foundation I built and made it stronger. That's not a failure on my part. It's the whole point of being a father." The audience applauded, but I was focused on the pride in his voice and the realization that we'd both learned something important about how success should be measured. 6 months later, Chen and Associates was Pinnacle's fastest-growing regional operation, and I'd been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development with oversight of hybrid transformation initiatives across all Pinnacle markets. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, stock options that would vest over 5 years, and the opportunity to relocate to Chicago to work directly with corporate leadership. But it also came with a choice that would define the next phase of my career. James Morrison called me into his office on a Friday afternoon in late spring, exactly 2 years after our first conversation about acquiring Hartford Digital Solutions. "Marcus, I'll be direct," he said. "Pinnacle's board has been impressed with your work in the Southwest. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to our CEO. It would mean moving to Chicago, probably within 6 months, and taking responsibility for digital transformation strategy across all our operations. The offer was everything I should have wanted. Recognition at the highest levels of a Fortune 500 company, financial compensation that would secure my future, and professional opportunities that could lead to executive leadership roles I'd never imagined pursuing. What would happen to the Southwest operations? I asked. We'd promote someone internally to maintain continuity. The systems you've established are solid enough to run without your direct oversight. And Chen and Associates? Would continue operating as it has been, under local management. I asked for a week to consider the offer, knowing that the decision involved more than just career advancement. It involved choosing between personal ambition and the relationships that had made that ambition meaningful. That Sunday, during our weekly family dinner, I shared the opportunity with my parents. Chicago, my mother said thoughtfully. That's a long way from Phoenix. It's also a remarkable opportunity, David added. Chief Innovation Officer at Pinnacle would put you in a position to influence how digital transformation happens across hundreds of companies. What do you think I should do? My father set down his fork and looked at me with the same serious expression he'd worn during our most important conversations over the past 2 years. I think you should ask yourself the same question you asked me when we first started working together. What kind of success will make you feel like you've built something that matters? It was the right question, and the answer came more clearly than I'd expected. The following Monday, I walked into James Morrison's office with a counteroffer that surprised both of us. I'd like to decline the Chicago position, I said, but I have a different proposal. I'm listening. Let me establish a Southwest innovation hub based in Phoenix. Give me authority to develop hybrid transformation models that can be scaled to other markets, but let me do it from here, working with the teams and clients who've made this approach successful. Morrison considered this for several minutes. That's not a standard corporate structure for Pinnacle. The results we've achieved aren't standard either. He smiled. Fair point. What would you need to make this work? 3 months later, the Pinnacle Southwest Innovation Hub opened in a converted warehouse in downtown Phoenix, 3 blocks from the original Chen & Associates office. The space combined traditional conference rooms with collaborative workspaces, digital laboratories for testing new platforms, and a client experience center where business owners could see hybrid marketing strategies in action. David served as Senior Advisor for Client Relations, helping other family businesses navigate the emotional and practical challenges of modernization. I led the technical development team, while overseeing strategic implementation across Pinnacle's growing network of hybrid agencies. But the most meaningful moment came during our grand opening celebration, when Maria Santos from Desert Bloom Cafe approached me with a question that brought everything full circle. Marcus, she said, my daughter just graduated from ASU with a marketing degree, and she's interested in digital strategy. Do you think there might be opportunities for her here? I looked around the room at the team we'd assembled. Traditional marketers working alongside data scientists, family business owners collaborating with technology entrepreneurs, established companies partnering with innovative startups, and realized we'd created something that hadn't existed when I'd started. This journey. Actually, I said, I think we're going to need a lot of people who understand both tradition and innovation. Tell her to send me her resume. Later that evening, after the last guests had left and the catering staff had cleaned up, I found myself alone in the Innovation Hub with my father, both of us looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Phoenix skyline. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd stayed at Chen & Associates right after college? I asked. Every day, he said, and I'm grateful you didn't. Why? Because if you'd stayed, we both would have been comfortable. And comfortable? People don't build things like this. He gestured toward the space around us, the intersection of everything we'd learned about business, family, success, and the courage required to transform failure into opportunity. The The kid who was told his designs would never amount to anything, he continued, didn't just become successful. He became someone who helps other people become successful. That's a different kind of achievement entirely. As we turned off the lights and locked the doors, I realized that the story I'd been telling myself for 5 years, about proving my father wrong, about succeeding despite his doubts, about becoming the boss to show him who was right, had evolved into something more complicated and more satisfying. The real story was about 2 people who'd learned that the best kind of victory isn't defeating someone you care about. It's helping them discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed, while discovering your own capacity for forgiveness, growth, and the kind of success that makes everyone involved stronger than they were before. The Phoenix skyline stretched out before us, full of lights that represented thousands of businesses, families, and individuals pursuing their own versions of success. Tomorrow, we'd help some of them figure out how to build something that mattered. Tonight, we'd earn the satisfaction of knowing we'd already built something that would last. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.